The Sabres will pick 11th in the upcoming NHL draft. Should they trade the pick? Also, we'll break down Dylan Cozens' regrettable season. Coming up here in the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Sneaky Joe DiBiase on today's show. One day after the NHL draft lottery, reaction to that. Should the Sabres trade the pick? They will be at number 11. San Jose gets the number 1 pick. They did have the best odds. Also today on the show, an exit interview of meeting with Dylan Cozens, our breakdown of his season, what happened to Dylan Cozens, and why it might not be fair to compare Tage Thompson to Dylan Cozens when it comes to regression last year. I'll explain coming up in a little bit on today's show. If you would like to get in on the show via texting, we've been debating about Cozens this morning and trading the 11th pick, and you are not already a texter, you could sign up by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. So it was completely chalk, the NHL draft lottery. No changes whatsoever. It's like they didn't even really need to run it. The Sabres picked 11th as they were supposed to. They had an 80% shot of picking number 11. Everyone stayed exactly where they were coming into the night. Nobody moved up. San Jose was number 1. Chicago was number 2. The odds of that happening, by the way, were very low, but we got that to happen. It's rare that you do see that, but it did indeed happen. Macklin Celebrini is going to the Sharks. I appreciate Mike Greer, GM of the Sharks, not trying to even hide it or play the game and pretend like, well, we don't know if we're going to draft Macklin. We got to see how the process plays out, and we got to meet with our scouting staff. No, he went up there, like, yeah, we're going to draft Macklin Celebrini. He basically said it. He talked about Celebrini. He said, yeah, probably, when he got asked directly if he's going to take him. So he's going to San Jose. And good for the Sharks. I did not want to see him go to Chicago. Chicago, to me, still shouldn't have their first-round pick because of the sexual assault cover-up for Kyle Beach 10 years ago. It's disgusting to me that Connor Bedard is playing there in the first place. So didn't want to see Chicago win it. Didn't want to see anybody else from the conference win it. Montreal, Ottawa would not have wanted to see that. Columbus, I guess I would have had a very strong opinion about. But San Jose's actually surprisingly missed the playoffs 5 consecutive years. I did think it was funny. John Buchagras had the gall to say during that broadcast yesterday, it's been some long years here for San Jose since they've been good. And we're over here like, they made the playoffs. How many playoff games do we think San Jose has played since the last Sabre playoff game? It's got to be over 100 would be my total guess without looking it up. So they haven't suffered that long. 5 years, it's not nothing, but come on. But good to see them get it. The Sharks get Celebrini. The Sabres pick 11th, and I want to see the Sabres trade that pick. And I thought Joe Marino from Locked On Bills actually put it perfectly. I don't know that I've ever seen sports fans in such unity together on one idea than Sabres should trade pick number 11. Everyone seems to think that way. If I were going to be the dissenting opinion to some degree, what I would tell you is I need the Sabres to trade first-round assets. I don't necessarily need them to trade pick number 11. I would group pick number 11 in with the 4 other first-round prospects that are not Zach Benson. Benson's already on the team. I kind of want to put him on his own tier. But Isaac Rosén, Matthew Savoy, Noah Ostlund, Yuri Kulik, and pick number 11. Those 5 assets, I need to see the Sabres trade at the minimum one of those. I'd like to see them trade 2 or 3 of those. If you told me they traded pick 11 as one of the assets that were sent away, that's fine. If you wanted to tell me they kept pick 11, but over the course of the offseason. They traded away both Matthew Savoy and Isaac Rosen in huge trades. I'm good with that too. If you want to outbid other teams for a star player, then your prospects will probably be more valuable. Because if you're bidding for, we'll just use Brady Tkachuk as an example. If Brady Tkachuk were to become available and you're trying to outbid the other teams, well, one sales pitch to Ottawa would be, hey, Philly over here is offering you their best prospect and the 12th overall pick. You probably have to wait 3 or 4 years for the 12th overall pick to make a real difference on your lineup. Why don't I give you one prospect to match their prospect? And instead of a first-round pick, I'll give you another prospect, both of which are about ready to jump into the NHL. Maybe you only have to wait 1 year or 0 years as opposed to 3 or more. So I don't need to see them trade 11. I just need to see them trade a chunk of those assets. And I would group number 11 into that. It's a strong defensive draft. We'll talk more about the draft as we approach it coming up next month. We'll get Hadi Kalakash on from Locked On NHL Prospects. From first glance, it looks like the draft is rich with defensemen, which is good because the Sabres behind Ryan Johnson don't really have any developmental defensemen in the pipeline to come up. Nikita Novikov is maybe worth mentioning here. He might be tracking towards the NHL defenseman, and that's kind of it. So blue line would be where you want to prioritize if it were to come to that. But we'll talk about trade options as well as we get closer to the draft, because again, I will be, as much time as we focus on the prospects, we should be focusing on trade targets when it comes to pick number 11. When we come back here in the Locked On Sabres podcast, what in the world happened to Dylan Cozens this year? We'll break down his season and look ahead for the Sabres number 2 center coming back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here, talk more about Monopoly Go. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much more to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine and plenty more. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench. Go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for your first listen every day. Be sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. It's streaming 24/7 every day on YouTube or on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. Let's break down the season for Dylan Cozens. It was a very tough season for the Sabres center. And we'll talk about whether he's going to be a center forever, by the way, as part of today's show, focusing in on Cozens. He is somebody that, doing more and more research, I came away more and more discouraged about the year that he just had. You know, Thompson, for instance, his numbers went down, but he was injured, and we knew injury, wrist, back for Tage. There wasn't as much mystery maybe with Cozens, and he still scored 29 goals. 30-goal pace because he missed 11 games. So 30-goal pace. All right, like I still have a player worth the money. He's worth $7 million, plus scoring 30-plus goals. I looked at some of the advanced numbers on Thompson today, and he actually was a very strong defensive player this year as well. Well, what about Cozens? Because Cozens is lumped in with Tage. And now that I'm looking, especially their advanced numbers, and the more I look at their seasons as a whole, I don't think it's honestly fair to Tage to do it, to lump them in together. I think Cozens was significantly worse than even Thompson was this season. And I am really worried about what we have ahead for Dylan Cozens. I think he is probably job number 1 for Lindy Ruff when it comes to individuals. Well, let's compare last season to this season. Last season was electric. He was unbelievable. 31 goals, 37 assists, 68 points, all situations, power play production, even strength production. He had 21 goals at 5-on-5 of the 31. So he wasn't reliant on the power play, but was still good on it. But just a great even strength offensive player. I'm throwing up here on our YouTube channel his evolving hockey cards, and percentile for total offense amongst the league's forwards, 90th percentile. 90th percentile. Now, what he never had and was always way overrated was defense. There were giveaways. He definitely was not the player in his own end that his reputation had made it out to be. But offensively, he was so good. He was a great player, worth the contract, worthy of being a top 6 centerman. This year, it could not have gone, I don't think, any worse. And there are deeper conversations to be had here about Dylan Cozens, including, did it really happen that fight early in the year against Garnet Hathaway of the Philadelphia Flyers, where Cozens got knocked on his butt and missed a couple of games, wore a cage for a while, did it spook him? Was he shaking off the cobwebs the rest of the season? Was he less decisive? Did that fight impact him? Is there a need for sports psychology here as a focus for Dylan Cozens? That's a guess. I don't actually know if it's actually mental or not, but you can only wonder because you're trying to find an explanation for how things got so much worse. He went from 21 goals at 5-on-5 last year to 8 goals this year, all season long. All of those minutes, all of those situations where the Sabres were at even strength, 5-on-5 this year, Dylan Cozens gave them 8 goals. That is absolutely unacceptable. $1 million per even strength goal cannot happen. He ends the year for totals, 18 goals, 29 assists, 47 points, playing 17 minutes a night. Now, one thing that I said about Cozens last year, coming into this year, that he needed to improve upon was his play in his own end. Hey, if you want to become a Chris Drury level two-way player, if you want to be a Selke guy one day, you have got a ways to go defensively. To be fair, he did get a little bit better defensively, as a lot of the team did, but still not very good at all. Evolving Hockey had him in the 19th percentile, goals above replacement for defense. The big difference, though, especially on these Evolving Hockey, he goes down from the 90th percentile offensively at even strength to the 25th percentile. A just massive, massive drop by Dylan Cozens. And you could say, hey, one impact above even maybe an injury and above the fight that he had earlier in the year is that the guy lost one of his best wingers for almost the entirety of the season. Jack Quinn played very little this year, and he missed him. And I do believe that is correct on some level. But at the same time, last year when Cozens had his big numbers, Jack Quinn was a rookie. Jack Quinn was a guy who scored 13 goals. This was not Nikita Kucherov that he lost off his line. Sure, it probably hurt him. They had built chemistry together, but 14 goals last year for Jack Quinn, 37 points, a rookie at 21 years old. Like, you know, from where you had been, was Zach Benson that much worse? Was whoever else you ended up playing with that much worse? There were minutes the year before we played with Vinny Hinostroza a lot, and he still managed to score 30 goals. And Peterka, by the way, you could argue makes up for that, because Peterka went from a 12-goal scorer, 32-point guy who disappeared for long stretches of his rookie season to, of course, this year, Peterka breaks out. Has a giant year, 30 goals, leads the team, 28 goals, to be exact. And he was one behind Tage, but you know what I mean. He was one of their top goal scorers. He was great all year. You had a jump from Peterka. He played on your wing almost the entire year until those final weeks of the season where Peterka went up with Tage. So I don't really want to use teammates as an excuse. I just don't know what happened. I started to wonder later in the year. I saw a couple of video breakdowns on Twitter of this, that Cozens looked like he had some tunnel vision on zone entries and where to go with the puck, how to get set up, where to disperse the puck to his wingers on the wall. That's a lot of the stuff that a center is supposed to do. You're supposed to quarterback the zone entry at even strength. You're supposed to get things set up. You're supposed to be the playmaker of the line. And there were a lot of times where that just wasn't happening for Dylan Cozens. And it left me wondering by the end of the season, is Dylan Cozens even a center? Is he more meant to play the wing in his NHL career? He played the wing at the World Championships, was it 2 years ago now, and was amazing at it. And the Sabres have never really tried him at the wing. And in part, that's been situational, right? Even though they did try Middlestat at the wing for times. So maybe there were pockets that they could have tried it, but they never did. So I'm not there yet. I think you have to go into next season with him playing center and continuing down that path. I think you only move him if it gets desperate. If, hey, this just isn't working. He hasn't progressed. He still isn't performing. Let's try this. Let's try to put him on the wing with Tage, or maybe with a center that they haven't acquired yet. William Karlsson, I had in my mock offseason the other day. Someone like that. That could be an option for Dylan Cozens, because otherwise I would be at my wit's end. It's only 1 year. It's only one bad year. Where is he going to fall? Is he going to be more like last season, or is he going to be more like the year prior? And that's the big question mark, and we don't really know where he's going to be. But what does that mean for the long term? What does that mean for the roster? What does that mean for his contract? We'll get to all of that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Sneaky Joe DiBiase. We're talking Dylan Cozens, how his season went, and spoiler alert, it was not very good at all. We'll do all that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented here on the show by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, plenty more. You've got the Stanley Cup playoffs going on right now. Hey, pick your favorite. It is wide open right now in the Stanley Cup playoffs. In my opinion, every team but Vancouver is currently capable of winning the Stanley Cup. So go check out some futures if you want to over at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We're wrapping things up talking Dylan Cozens, who just signed his contract extension just over a year ago. He is only 1 year in to a long, lengthy deal that pays him over $7 million per year, just a shade under Tage Thompson at $7.1 million that doesn't expire until 2030. So they are in this for the long haul. He is here, and they need to make it work. They need to make it work. There is no alternative. He's paid. They've committed. He's got to be the player he was last year. He cannot be the player he was this year, or they have got a massive problem on their hands. So, how does he bounce back? Lindy has a job on his hands. I think one benefit, as we talked about earlier, even though I think it's not an excuse for his play last year, is you want to see Jack Quinn and JJ Peterka play with him for a full season. You want to see those two really help him along. Both are good playmakers. Both have good shots. You just have an all-around good second line. You'd like to see Cozens improve defensively as well. One key here about Lindy. Go look at his track record with Jack Hughes. Go look at his track record with Nico Hischier, but more with Hughes. Hughes became a 200-foot player, a much better player in his own end under Lindy. And that's what I wonder about Cozens. Is Lindy going to come in and really focus in on, hey, we're going to really focus in on your shutdown abilities, because that's got to improve just as much as your offensive game does. Your offense will come. It'll come back. I believe in you. We got Peterka and Quinn back on your line. That can work. But how are we going to get Cozens to be better in his own end is a big key. But, of course, if that didn't happen, you'd still might be okay as long as he got the goals coming back. Can you get back to a 30-goal scorer, someone that's worthy of being on the top power play unit? Now, again, I think vision is the #1 key for Cozens, because he is strong enough. He could probably fill out a little bit more at 23 years old, but he's strong enough. He's certainly fast enough. He's a good enough skater. I think he's got good enough hands. I think his shot is pretty good. The thing about him is vision. is where to go with the puck and when. There is a hockey IQ question for me right now with Dylan Cozens when it comes to the center position. And those are things that can be troubling if you don't figure it out. But it's weird because I didn't have these questions a year ago, which is why I want to believe that there is a chance last year was just a total fluke, and that different coach, different, urgency, different captain, perhaps different line mates, that this year can go a lot better for Dylan Cozens. Again, the length of the contract, you're not like, here's the thing. I don't think you could trade him right now. If you want, if Brady Tkachuk, I'm just going to use Tkachuk from now on as like an example, even though I know he's not likely to become available. If Brady Tkachuk became available tomorrow, I don't think you could trade Dylan Cozens for him. Like, I don't think you could trade Dylan Cozens plus something for him. I don't even know that how he's viewed in the league at that contract with uncertainty about what level of player you have. I don't know that he's even he's not an asset. Like, to me, any even massive trade, big trade, Marner trade, Kaprizov trade, Tkachuk trade, anything that's on that level, I don't think Cozens is a part of the discussion. I think Tage is a part of the discussion if you really want to go that far with it. And the other guys are too. I don't think Cozens is, because I don't think Cozens is fetching you much right now. I don't know how many teams would want that contract until he looks good again. And this is where we're at. Last year, he was not nearly worth the contract, but the year before, he was worth more than the contract. So can he return to that? And then you could get back to that looking like a really solid deal. So huge season coming up for Dylan Cozens. He is key. I don't know that there's a player. Maybe Tage has to be the answer to this, right? Tage has probably got to be number one. But number two is Cozens. Maybe Cozens is even is number one. If I told you one player that I'm going to guarantee, the others still could, but if you get one lock, one guarantee that one guy will return to form from last year, I might say Cozens. Part of that is because I'm more sure Tage will return than I am Cozens. So if I get the one guarantee, I think I might say Dylan Cozens would be the guy that I would use it on. So we'll see what we get from Dylan Cozens. But again, not a pretty season whatsoever. 18 goals that he kind of inflated at the end with a couple of empty netters in that final game. 2 goals in that last game, 1 goal a couple days before that. So we'll see what happens with him. That's going to do it for us, though, today here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. If you are not a part of our text line and you want to jump in, be sure to head over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres, and you could check us out from there. That's going to do it for us today here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Enjoy the playoffs. We'll talk some more playoffs next time here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Amerks on Friday as well. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.